My name is Rusty Edmister. I have the pleasure of being in the home of a gentleman who has incredible experience with an organization here in the United States called the Grange. He's been kind enough to let me come to his home. This is in association with the History Museum in Goldsboro. They currently have an exhibit on the Grange in Wayne County, but we're going to talk about the Grange all the way out to a national, maybe an international perspective. First, Ed, would you state your name for me?
My name is Ed Luttrell.
And you told me before we turned the camera on, you born and grew up in Oregon.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Oregon, fourth generation Oregonian, which is kind of a odd thing for most people. And I still remember when I joined the Grange. I was 13 and a half, and I came home from school, and my folks said, "Sign here, you'll join in the Grange."
Oh, okay. So it was kind of a forced fit. But let's start a little differently. What is the Grange?
The Grange is a family community organization with its roots in agriculture.
Okay.
The two primary purposes that the Grange had when it began was to be a social connector, provide social activities and outlets to their members, and also for education, both formal and informal. The Grange has always been very dedicated to the idea that we can help our members reach their full potential.
All right, how old is the Grange?
It was organized December 4th, 1867.
Wow, almost 200 years old.
No, it's 156, 57.
Well, I was editorializing, yes, but it's been around a long time. And started, you said in the 1860s, that in most people's head is the time of the Civil War in the United States, and half the country wasn't even a state yet, right?
Well, actually, the Civil War was one of the reasons the Grange was formed, because in the aftermath of the Civil War, after every war, there's always a depression, there's always financial hardship, and the founders of the Grange saw the need for the American farmer and their family to be educated, to take advantage of the opportunities that the railroads were starting to give at that point.
Right.
And looked for ways of how to make a difference, and they decided that a fraternal order called the Grange would be the best way to allow the American farmer and their families to better themselves and their communities.
All right, so as this Grange started, where did it start?
Well, it was started in Washington, D.C. by these 7 men plus their compatriots.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things that I found is that they were all from somewhere in the East Coast.
Okay.
Oliver Hudson Kelley, who's kind of denoted as the founder of the Grange, or the father, he got a commission to tour the South in 1866.
Okay.
And one of the things that came back when he started talking with his friends and co-workers was that having an organization that wasn't political, that would speak to the commonality of the farmer, was probably the best way to go. And so these men and women came together and formed the Grange on December 4th, 1867.
Okay. And even though it's from Washington, what you're talking about being started, it was not an organization of the government.
It had no affiliation with the government. The only reason they were started in Washington, D.C. is because that's where they were working.
Okay.
And they actually met in the superintendent of the propagating gardens, who was William Saunders, who was the first national president of the Grange.
Okay. And so how quickly did it get accepted across the country?
Well, the Kelley in 1868 went home for the summer, like most of the clerks did back then.
Right.
And on the way, he decided he would organize Granges on the way in Pennsylvania and New York, etc.
Sort of like Johnny Appleseed.
and he failed miserably
Oh, I'm sorry.
until he got to the last area in New York that he went to, and he organized Fredonia Grange #1, which is the first working Grange ever created
In New York.
in the world.
But I mean, the Fredonia is in New York State. Okay, okay. And let's branch to today. How many Grange chapters, organizations are there?
Well, I haven't got the most recent numbers.
But
They'll be
you know.
available, but just approximately 2,000 Granges in approximately 40 states, plus the District of Columbia.
So is it appropriate to say it is national but not international?
Actually, that's one of the interesting things about the Granges. From
Okay.
the day one, they made the decision that we could organize Granges internationally, but as soon as they reached 15 Granges, they'd have to form their own national organization.
Okay.
So we were, in essence, never international in that sense. Because if the Grange caught on in Canada, the Philippines, and anywhere else,
Mexico, maybe.
well, we don't have any records showing that there were any in Mexico.
Okay.
But as soon as they reached 15 Granges, they were almost forced to break away and form their own national organization.
Okay. So the leadership that, and we're going to get to that because you've been president of National Grange, but other national Granges are similar to yours, but not affiliated directly with the U.S. National Grange, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And I'm sure all these national Granges work together on things that are good ideas, but as far as the reporting structure of the organization, when you were national president, you were president of the U.S. National Grange, not a wider perspective.
Well, actually, there's Canada in the 1880s and the late 70s had lots of Granges formed, and they were actually called the Dominion.
Oh, okay.
But the thing is, there was only courtesy interactions between the National Grange and the Canadian branch.
All right. So if I heard you correctly a couple of paragraphs ago, there are 40, based on the numbers you have, 40 states have Grange organizations. How many chapters are there?
Roughly 2,000.
Oh, yeah, you said that. I'm sorry. 2,000. And in North Carolina, there are...
I would hesitate to guess because I haven't looked at that number in a recent time.
But you and I had talked about before, there's not a Grange organization in every county.
No.
There is in Wayne County, and we'll get to that shortly. But even though a state like North Carolina with 100 counties, there isn't a Grange in every county.
No.
Okay. So I think another thing before we get to your national job, you were president of the state Grange in Oregon at one time.
Yes, in the late 90s.
How many Oregon chapters were there?
At that time, we had 220 local Granges, and
Okay.
we had over 16,000 members.
Wow. And so maybe you touched on another subject. What is the typical chapter like? How many folks are in it? And I know that's an average, but just give me a feeling for that.
Well, the Granges will probably on average run 30 to 35 members.
Okay.
Some Granges, like Grantham Grange here in North Carolina, they're closer to 140, 150.
Wow. Okay.
So it's very dependent upon the local membership on the size of that local Grange.
Okay. All right.
Because I've seen Granges in very small rural communities where they have almost everybody in the community as a member of that Grange because they're involved in that community.
Okay.
And then I've also seen some very urban Granges with the potential of, thousands of members struggling just to keep a quorum going in their meetings.
Oh, okay. Okay. Starting in 1868, I think you said, December the 4th, 67, it has grown to 40 of the states, 2,000 chapters. Is it a growing organization?
Well, actually, it depends on how you want to look at it.
No, I got it.
Because just in the last 6 months, they have organized the first Grange in Hawaii that's ever been.
Oh, really? Okay.
We're down to one state in the union that's never had a Grange.
Which one is that?
Utah.
Excuse me, Utah? I would thought you were going to say Alaska, but Utah. Okay. Not a lot of farmers in Utah?
That's one of the misconceptions of the Grange.
Please.
We are an agriculturally based organization, but we are not limited to farmers.
Okay.
I think a lot of the members are like myself. We live on a little piece of property. We have a few head of cattle or horses or sheep or whatever
Right.
choice, or we may raise a few acres of hay or some crop.
Right.
But the thing is, a lot of our members are not farmers who are making their living from the soil. And I think agricultural organizations have had to make this choice over the decades past of, do you welcome your people who want to support your organization and agree with the mission, which is the promotion of agriculture, or do you want to limit yourself to active farmers who are engaged in agriculture?
Okay.
And the Grange made the choice many years ago that we wanted to be more inclusive. We wanted to have people come in who believed that agriculture was important. And when you look at our current membership today, I think you see people who they prefer local grown food. They prefer to see that agriculture and the environment are compatible and there are not very many conflicts between them.
Uh-huh.
And so that's the way I look at the way the Granges evolved. We've never lost track of why we were formed.
Right.
But we're just as much in favor of growing a garden as in growing 1,000 acres of cropland.
I am so glad you said that, because there are people who will watch this video who say, I'm not a farmer, so there's no place for me in the Grange. That's not what you just told me at all. Anybody can be in the Grange if they have this love of, concern with agriculture in general, correct?
Well, in essence, the only qualifications for membership are being of good moral character.
Okay.
We don't particularly want the bank robbers and the car muggers and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And having an interest in agriculture.
Okay.
And one of the ways I've always looked at it is, if you enjoy a good meal, you better have some interest in agriculture.
Yeah, right. And a meal that won't kill you over time. Okay. Membership, the exclusive part is, the part that would exclude you is your failure to have a moral character. How about age, sex, any of that matter?
No, none of that matters. In fact, one of the things that I'm particularly proud of, and most of the members are as well, is the fact that in 1867, not only did we allow women as equal members, we require that every local Grange have at least 4 women as active members.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because who would know?
Today in this world, we take it for granted that women are involved in a part of our life. But
right.
The Grange has said from day one, women are not, they're equal to us men. And
Yep.
It's a wonderful thing.
Right.
In fact, in the Grange, there are 16 officers. Women can hold every one of them, and 4 of those offices can only be held by women.
Which are those?
The lady assistant steward,
Okay.
and the 3 graces, Ceres, Pomona, and Flora. And those positions, the lady assistant assists in the floor work of the Grange, and kind of self-explanatory when you see presenting the flag and doing things like that.
Yeah.
But the three graces were the three officers that were not named local the way that would have normally have been in the Grange. They were to honor womanhood and show our respect for agriculture.
Okay. And those are exclusively reserved for women.
That is correct.
Okay. So let's go back to you personally. Your parents had you sign a paper that you joined the Grange at 13. How old do I have to be to get in the Grange if I'm a kid?
Well, the thing is, the Grange membership technically starts at age 14, but then there's a little clause that says at age 13 and a half you can submit your application.
Okay. So you got in as early as it's possible to get in.
That is correct.
Okay. Now, this is maybe an ignorant question I'm going to ask anyway. I've been out of school a long time, but when I was in school, we had something called the Future Farmers of America. The FFA. There's no relationship between the Grange, the FFA, or the 4-H, correct?
It's not completely.
Okay.
The 4-H organization was supported and encouraged by the Grange. In fact, the four-leaf clover emblem was being used by a Grange club in Ohio, I believe.
Okay.
And they willingly gave it to the Extension Service to use for their new youth organization, 4-H.
Okay.
And so the Grange was actively involved in the formation of 4-H. And we were indirectly involved with the organization of the FFA.
Okay.
We weren't as involved with it, and I think mainly because they didn't allow girls to start with. And our organization was more about the family and the equal opportunities.
Great. All right, so you joined the Grange in Oregon at 13 and a half, but eventually you became the state president of the Grange in Oregon. How old were you then?
I was 36 when I was first elected.
Okay. And is that something you campaigned for, or they saw your leadership and said you're the guy?
Well, the reality of the Grange is that our bylaws at the national level forbid us from campaigning for office.
Oh, okay.
The philosophy of the Grange is that the office should seek the man or woman.
Okay.
And I was asked if I would be willing to put my name forward, and I foolishly said yes.
Wait a minute. We'll talk about that in a second. But I want to go back. You told me a few paragraphs ago that women are a big part of the Grange and valued by the Grange. So a woman could be president of a local chapter or the state organization, correct?
Well, the first woman to be a state president was in the 1880s in Minnesota.
Wow. That before they could vote, they could be president of the state Grange. I'm impressed. You guys have been ahead of the curve on a lot of things, haven't you?
Very much so.
That's great. All right, so tell me about what you did as the state president of Oregon Grange. I mean, you must have been all over the state of Oregon.
Well, internally, I felt it was a very necessary thing to travel and do conferencing and education.
Okay.
And the other factor I felt was very important with all that travel was that eastern and western Oregon are separated by the Cascade Range, which is a natural barrier.
Right.
And so we did a lot of events on both sides of that barrier. And I thought it was very important. The other aspect that we did was we were reinvigorating our legislative program. At that time, there were several anti-agricultural initiatives being proposed in the state of Oregon. And so we worked very hard and got our membership motivated and involved in fighting those particular measures.
And when you say legislative, you're talking potentially the state and the federal governments.
Yeah, in Oregon we have the initiative and referendum powers. And so those were we were more dealing with those than federal legislation at that time.
Okay. Okay. So you were president of the Oregon State Grange at 36, but I know then at some point you became president of the National Grange. When did that happen?
When I was 47.
So you showed everybody the leadership and you were asked to be president of the National Grange. Is that the way it worked?
Not only did I show my leadership, I spent 6 years between those two times doing leadership and membership development for the National Grange.
And this is a national effort on the Grange's part?
Yes.
Wow, wow. And so the national president sounds like a huge job to me, but you must have had a big staff to help you with all of that?
Oh, I wish.
It wasn't that way?
At the peak, we had 14 members on staff, counting myself.
Okay, all right. Were you ever at home?
What I did was I worked out of Washington, D.C. for about 1 week every month.
Okay.
I spent roughly 1 week at home working out of my home office, and then I would spend normally about 2 weeks traveling the country.
Okay, okay. And so the national headquarters for the Grange is Washington.
Yeah, it's actually, in my mind, the coolest office in the entire country.
What does that mean? The coolest office?
Well, we're at 1616 H Street.
H Street, okay.
Northwest, which means that from my office, I could look out the window and see the White House below.
Was that a good thing? Anyway, we won't get into politics here. But okay, so right in the heart of Washington, not in a suburb somewhere, right downtown.
We were the only private building in the Federal Square.
Oh, okay, okay. How long did you keep that job?
I was president for 8 years.
What, consecutive years?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And in that time, one of your goals, I guess, was to grow the Grange, meaning membership and states and stuff like that, correct?
Absolutely was one of my goals.
Okay. And how did you feel like you did?
We built a good foundation.
Okay.
There were some other issues that came up that were legally based. We were challenged on our trademarks of the organization by a number of entities. And we had a state Grange try to break away and take the assets of our organization with them.
Really?
And so I spent a great deal of time dealing with attorneys and that type of thing. But the end result was that we set precedents that will benefit all nonprofit organizations, that you can't break away from a parent and take anything with you, including the name.
Okay.
And we also set precedents in trademark law that a nonprofit doesn't have to be using their marks for commercial gain in order to protect them.
Okay. Okay, so after all this work in Washington and across the country and in Oregon, your personal life brought you to North Carolina. Why North Carolina?
Well, I traveled extensively all through the country, and mostly in the rural areas. So the cities are not a place that I probably enjoy that much, but the people in the rural areas are what I dealt with. And of all my travels, North Carolina seemed the closest to home that I had ever found.
Great.
And so I like the pace of life, I like the people, and the countryside is beautiful here. And there is such a strong agricultural presence.
Yep.
And when my daughter moved to upstate New York with my grandchildren, I wanted to be within driving distance of them.
Okay.
And North Carolina fit the bill.
It did. It did. And we're glad you chose this place. But one of the reasons I'm sitting in your home now, and we're near Benson, North Carolina, not too far from Goldsboro, was because you're a member now of the Grange in Wayne County.
That is correct.
Okay, and maybe I should ask, is it the Goldsboro Grange or the Wayne County Grange, or what is it called?
It's the Grantham Grange.
Grantham.
There are
Okay.
2 Granges in Wayne County, Brogden and Grantham.
Oh, really? 2 in Wayne County?
Yes.
I had no idea. Okay.
And what we're doing right now is we're exploring the possibility of starting a Grange in the McGee's Crossroads area in Johnston County.
Yeah, I just came through there on the way to your house.
Yeah, but we're exploring the possibility, and
Good.
we're just learning and taking our time.
Okay, well, that's fine. And my guess is that most of the people that will watch this video are citizens of Goldsboro, Wayne County, or the local area. Why should they consider joining your Grange?
Well, the thing is, the Grange is about people. It's not about the projects we do, the community service, the educational aspects, or the legislative component to our organization.
Okay.
It's really about the people. And the one thing I will tell anybody is that the friendships that you make in the Grange last you a lifetime. Just recently I made a cross-country trip with an antique pickup trying to get it home, and I had a problem in Kansas, and sure enough I knew somebody in Kansas, and they dropped what they were doing, came out, took us a ride to the auto parts, and really treated us to lunch, and we had a good little visit, and then I got the parts, and we went on our way.
These are members of the Grange that you knew through the Grange.
That's right, through the Grange. And of course I probably know a few more than the average member, simply because I've been in a position where I had to do traveling. But I have heard the very same story from at least 3 different people.
Right.
Who somebody in their came driving through their community had a car problem. In fact, one of those was my father.
Okay.
And he got a phone call because he was in the state Grange roster as the local person to be contacted. And they just asked him if he could direct him to a good reputable shop. Well, not only did he direct him to the shop, he went and picked him up, took him to the hotel, came back, took him to dinner, took him to breakfast the next morning. And that's just normal behavior for a Grange member.
So like a brotherhood.
And yes.
Not to be gender specific, but like a fraternity sorority kind of thing.
Well, the thing is, the Grange is a fraternal organization.
Okay.
And so part of our initiation ceremony is to have people understand that we are brothers and sisters. And to me, the highest title in this organization wasn't president of the National Grange. It was being a brother in the organization.
Right, right. So I'm watching your video, and you've got me excited now about the Grange. Where do you meet? When do you meet? That kind of stuff.
Well, Grantham Grange meets on the 4th Monday of every month.
Okay.
And they meet at the Woodman's Insurance Lodge in Grantham.
Okay.
And they meet at 7 p.m.
Is it a dinner meeting, or is it you have dinner and then go?
They usually have dinner and have a few snacks.
Okay, okay.
But Grantham is a wonderful Grange in the sense that they are exactly how I always have, I trust that every Grange tries to be.
Okay.
Which means when you walk through the door, somebody shakes your hand, somebody's helped, shows you around.
They don't let you just wander around aimlessly.
Right. What we do is we try to make people feel welcome.
Great, great. And so to repeat what you said, Grantham, and we'll go to the other one in a second, Grantham meets on the 4th Monday in the Woodman's Insurance Lodge in Grantham. And how many members you got?
Somewhere between 140
in
and
Grantham.
150.
Wow. Okay. And so if I'm a citizen close enough to go to Grantham once a month, and have any interest in knowledge of agriculture, then it's a great place for me to go, correct?
It is a great place to go for friendship, fellowship, and also to help you grow as a person and a leader. Every Grange gives their members the opportunity to be chairman of a committee or to be an officer, because those are ways we each of us grow as individuals and as human beings.
Right.
And to me, the greatest gift that Grange has ever given me is the opportunity to give back to others.
Ah, so it's service to the community, whatever the community means. It could be locally, it could be bigger than that.
I have seen Granges all across the country, and I can tell you, if you can envision a community service project, an educational project,
right,
or a legislative outreach of event, there's a Grange somewhere in this country doing it.
Oh. And just to reiterate something you and I talked about earlier, I own a farm, but I rent it. You know, I mean, I own it, but rent it to a farmer. But my interest in the Grange, my personal interest in the Grange after you and I have talked, is the fact that I'm an amateur gardener. It sounds like the perfect place for me to get involved, to learn and be a part of community gardens or something like that, correct?
That is correct. One of the aspects of the Grange that is a little different than most organizations is that during every meeting there's a section that's called the lectures program or the program.
Okay.
And that is something that is supposed to be fun, educational, maybe incorporate music. It's supposed to be kind of an all-around type of program. Sure. And so most Granges have elements of this in at least some of their programs during the year. But gardening is a common thing. When to prune, how to prune, what kind of bugs will get rid of the bad bugs that infest our gardens.
How about keeping the deer off your plants?
That one I've heard 1,000 different ways.
Oh, that's my main interest right there.
But the thing is, the activities of our local Granges are determined by the local Grange. Right. They are not determined by the national or the state.
Locally, you decide.
But we decide.
Okay. Now, you said Grantham, 4th Mondays, 7 o'clock, Woodman's Insurance Lodge. How about the other one? I've forgotten the name. I'm sorry, but there's another.
Brogden Grange.
Brogden. You know when they meet by any chance?
They meet on the 4th Tuesday once a quarter.
Oh, so there's not as often. So if someone has less time to commit, Brogden may be a better answer.
Well, Brogden is going through a revitalization program right now.
Okay.
So I would anticipate that somewhere down the road they'll have more members and more energy, and they will be meeting once a month because they need to.
Right.
Because the more activities a Grange has, the more the Grange needs to meet.
Right. Right.
And most Granges do meet once a month.
Great. Well, I got to tell you, I've learned a ton of things about the Grange, and hopefully the people who watch this will as well. Anything I didn't ask you about the Grange we should record here for people learning about the Grange for maybe the first time?
There is so much to the Grange. One of the things I usually say is I could spend the next 3 hours talking about the Grange.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you are a history buff or not. One of the things about the Grange that has always impressed me in my studies of it is the fact that we made a difference in America. You know, there are a lot of organizations out there that do good things for their members and do good things for the community. But there are only a handful of organizations in our country's history that really changed the entire function of our country.
Right.
Things like the ability to regulate monopolies for the public good. That's one of the things the Grange did in the 1870s and 80s.
Right.
And people take it for granted. They take for granted that the cooperative mode of business exists and is very useful to urban and rural citizens.
Right.
And if it hadn't been for the Grange, would it have been introduced into this country? It's a good question.
Good question. Yeah.
And so to me, when you bring the fact of the history and of all the positive things the Grange has done, and then you look at what we still offer today, and that we're still a vibrant, growing organization. I mean, we've been declared dead half a dozen times over the last 150 years, and we're still here.
Still doing good work for the community.
Still doing good work. And then when you look at the personal aspect of having friends that you look forward to seeing every single month, or
Yep.
perhaps you see once a year at the state Grange of convention, what's that worth to a person?
Right.
To me, it is a priceless gift.
Right. It's given back. And great. Well, thank you for spending the time, and thank you for all that your personal contribution has meant, and the contribution of the Granges all over the country, including right here in Wayne County.
My pleasure.